It's game time. And if you've got a hunch about this NBA season, you could turn it into a big win on FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win.
Ooh, that guy's hotter than a microwave burrito.
Now that's a red-hot hunch.
21 plus and present in Ohio. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 326. Today's episode is all about breaking the chains of insignificance, finding our light and connection to nature with Marcelo Gleiser.
There's a whole invisible realm out there of things that we cannot see, but we can see with our instruments. So you can see infrared, you can see ultraviolet. In fact, you can see in all different kinds of wavelengths that light exists, like from gamma rays, which are really powerful, explosive things that happen when a star, blows up and when there is a nuclear reaction, all the way to the very, very long radio waves, which have nothing to do with the sounds that come from radio. They're just waves. They're very long wavelength. We can see with our eyes, but we can see it with radio telescopes. So, and the sounds, same thing. So we can, I call these instruments reality amplifiers, because what they tell us is that the reality that we humans can see with our five senses, I can see you, I can hear you, I can feel the chair. That is a tiny fraction of what's really out there. We are surrounded by this invisible reality that we cannot perceive, but our instruments can. So they allow us to see things. For example, if there were life existing in different kinds of wavelengths, we would be able to see that, in particular because most of our instruments are not really, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope is an infrared telescope. It sees light in the infrared mostly. But to use your question, which is a really interesting question, are there other kinds of life there? There are life as we don't know it.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Have you ever questioned the true impact of your actions or even your thoughts on the world around you? I think we're seeing one side of this. I don't think any of us can deny that, as a whole, humans have lost their connection with nature. The goal of science in its origins was to understand nature so we could work harmoniously with it. And now, the goal of most fields of science is to learn how to dominate nature. I don't know about you, but I don't think that will ever work, in the long term at least. It's kind of like we have this collective toddler brain, unable to connect our actions now with future consequences. Unless we're telling other people what to do. You gotta ban those plastic straws, right? Never mind the 4 million disposable masks that ended up in the ocean per day for several years. Totally fine. It was for the greater good. Oh yeah, and those disposable masks are made of plastic. Probably totally fine to be breathing that in all day too. Air is overrated. Sorry, that's all controversial. I forgot we don't question mass consensus because headlines told us not to. I'm doing it again, aren't I? This is why they will never let me be famous. Anyways, we have to know that our actions have an impact beyond the moment, beyond what we even see. But have you ever considered the impact your thoughts and beliefs have on this realm of reality? Our thoughts and beliefs are like the lens through which we view the world. They shape our reality in ways that we sometimes don't even realize. The Native Americans, for example, had a deep spiritual connection to nature. They saw the divine in every leaf and stream. They understood that nature wasn't just a resource to be used, it's a sacred part of their own existence. And these beliefs helped them foster a harmonious relationship with the environment, one that was based on respect and reverence. Now, contrast this with our modern perspective, where nature is usually seen as a collection of objects to be exploited. I think Pocahontas said it best. You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. Holidays get me all jingly. But do we really think that this shift in perspective doesn't have consequences? Do we really wonder why we're disconnected, not just from nature, but from ourselves? We've started treating ourselves and the world around us as tools, forgetting that we are, in essence, a part of a greater whole. This disconnection affects more than our environment. It affects our inner peace and our happiness. When we view nature as separate from us, we lose that sense of awe and wonder that comes from seeing ourselves as part of something larger. We dominate and control rather than nurture and coexist. And this mindset spills over into how we treat ourselves and even other people. We become harsh and judgmental. We forget the divine spark that resides in all of us. We criticize ourselves for what we think are flaws, forgetting that we're also an essential part of the divine, experiencing ourselves. And this disconnect didn't just begin with industrialization. Its roots stretch far back in history, evolving with scientific thought. It's important to remember that much of what we accept as settled science is still evolving. We are continually discovering new, profound insights that border on magical. And isn't it ironic that we've been conditioned to see our reality as kind of mundane, not realizing that life is really magic? And we dismiss magic as just a fantasy, but the true nature of reality is so much more fascinating when we actually understand it. We're not just isolated beings fighting against the world. We're vital parts in a vibrant, interconnected web of existence. So how do we reclaim this magical, empowering perspective? How do we start seeing nature not as something separate, but as an extension of ourselves and a reflection of the divine? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Marcelo Gleiser. Get ready for some really impressive accolades here. He's the Appleton Professor of Natural Philosophy and Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Dartmouth College, a world-renowned theoretical physicist and a public intellectual. He's authored hundreds of technical and non-technical papers and essays, and 6 books in English translated in 18 languages. He's a fellow of the American Physical Society. He received the Presidential Faculty Fellows Award from the White House. He's a founder and past director of the Institute for Cross-Disciplinary Engagement at Dartmouth. And if that's not enough, he's the 2019 Templeton Prize laureate, an honor that he shares with Mother Teresa, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama, and many scientists, including Jane Goodall. So 3 key things we will learn are why our disconnection with nature is more dangerous than you think, and who may be manipulating our beliefs. The mysteries of empty space and the hidden dimensions that may exist right where we stand, and how to break the chains of insignificance and discover the untapped power within. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Marcelo Gleiser to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
So I have been finding your book fascinating. It's interesting. Just in the last couple of years, I've just taken this really intense curiosity with like the actual history of the world versus just the truncated versions we've been taught in school, sometimes that weren't even true. And so I've been going back in like biblical history and quantum physics and things like that. And so this book is such a complement to what I've already been learning. And you begin by discussing this need to retell the story of who we are under a new mindset. Can you elaborate on what that new mindset entails and why it's needed?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I'm glad you're taking this historical some direction, because I think that's exactly where things go. So the idea is this: is that we as a species, right? We humans as a species, we have created this incredible technological world, full of amazing things, but also we have paid a very high price for what we have achieved in terms of all the pollution and environmental damage and overpopulation that has really created all sorts of complications, including the changing climate, right? So, and my premise is that why did this happen, right? I mean, and it happened mostly because if you look at the history of who we are, and that's where your question comes in, right? We always think of ourselves as, hey, we are the best, we are humans, we control the world, we are above nature. And this mindset that we are above nature is really dangerous, because it basically tells us that we can do whatever we want with the planet, right? And we have been doing whatever we want with the planet, right? We have been cutting forests, digging holes, and polluting oceans, and killing animals like crazy. And so the question is, okay, we know all this, and what can we do in order to change the course of our destiny, right? I mean, are we going in this kind of like one-way road and that's all there is to it? Or can we do something more profound and more meaningful and more spiritual, really, with our position, our place in the world? So what I propose is that I think we can, although, recent events always makes me doubt what we can or cannot do, to find the good in the human we got to dig a little deep, but we can find it. And my point is that we are not above nature. We are very much part of the natural world, and we depend profoundly and completely on how nature operates in order to be alive. And we sort of forgot all this because we have air conditioning, when it's hot. We have heating systems when it's cold. We have coats, and we have medication when we get sick. So we think that we can control natural events until something really bad happens, like a pandemic, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption that puts us back in our place where, wow, you know what? Even with all our technology and power, we're still very much dependent on how the world exists and operates in order to be here. So the change in the history of who we are is really a wake-up call to reintegrate ourselves into the planet in a much more constructive, a much more kind way. And I call in, knowledge from indigenous peoples, because if you look at the way they relate to the planet, how they relate to the land, they always say that the world is sacred, that the animals are sacred, there are spirits everywhere. So they worship the world, they worship nature, and they pay profound respect to this world, because they know, and they have known this for thousands of years, that without the balance of nature, we couldn't be here. And so I call for what I in the book, I call this, we have to re-sacralize nature. We have to kind of reconnect with nature in a profoundly spiritual way, really, where we understand the fragility of the ecosystems and how that fragility can make our lives in the planet quite complicated if we're not careful.
So I want to give listeners a sort of overview of how we got here, because it does seem that the less developed cultures still have that connection to nature, but it started so much longer, a long time ago, way before we even had technology. And you mentioned in your book that it started with the Copernican worldview change. Can you tell us what happened there and how that basically affected the way we see our place in the universe?
Yeah, so great. So there are two avenues here. Okay, one is way before Copernicus. It's like, if you look at our species, right, Homo sapiens, we've been around for about 300,000 years in this planet. Okay. The planet has been around for 4.5 billion years. So if you would compress 4.5 billion years in 24 hours in one day, we arrive about 2 seconds before midnight. So we just got here. But we clearly changed everything, right? We changed the whole planet. But for 95%, even more of the time that our species has been here, we didn't live in cities. We didn't have agrarian societies. We were what we call hunter-gatherers, bands of people that moved around the countryside, foraging for food and for fruits and surviving very much on that way. And those people, they had this more profound relationship to the land because they depended so much on what the earth could give them so that they could survive. And then about, give or take, 10,000 years ago, agrarian society began. So we realized that we could actually plant things on the ground. And if we did that, we could feed many more people. And that was very efficient because that meant that we didn't have to go hunting so much for survival. We could just, plant corn and a bunch of other things and survive that way. And that was wonderful. But the problem with that is that as we did it, we started to grow more and more in numbers in these small, well, what were then for us now small, but bigger and bigger cities. And whenever you put a lot of people in the same place, problems happen, right? Because you have to have a lot of food for these people, you have to have sewage for these people, you have to have drinking water for these people, and you have to have order because people say, hey, this piece of land is mine. Somebody had this idea, like, you know what? This is going to be my piece of the planet now. This is my land. And you start to think, where the heck did that come from? Where did this notion that we own a piece of the planet comes from? And our whole economy is based on that. And, buying your apartment or your house is like the greatest achievement, right? Because we now own a piece of the land. And if you think about this in the longer time span of the planet or even beyond the human life, we don't own anything. We are caretakers. You may say, hey, I'm here in this piece of land for 2 or 3 decades, but that's about it, and then I move on and the land stays. However, as we did that and we started to realize that we could work the land to create all these extra surplus of food, we also needed a hierarchy of power, people to control all these big growing populations, right? And that meant leadership, that meant sort of police force or army to enforce the rules in order to create, a sense of safety. And then city-states became very powerful with their own armies. And then, of course, hey, my neighbor has more food than I do. I want to go there. And then you start to have these big wars between city-states. And as this progresses, we start to understand that we can treat the land as if it were ours without really thinking of the consequences of what that means. Cutting forests to make wood to warm us up and for pasture, domesticating animals, etc. So fast forward a lot, say to the 19th, 18th century, then sciences, I'll go to Copernicus in a second. This is just sort of the history of our agrarian and industrial evolution. What happens is that when we get to industrial revolution about 200 years ago, we start to do something really wild. If you start to think about this, we start to consume the entrails of the planet in order to generate the energy that we needed to support what we were doing on the surface. So all the oil, all the natural gas, the coal, all this is coming from underground, so the entrails of the world. And these are remains of life that existed here hundreds of million years ago that were composted into oil and stuff like that. And we started to burn that thing, and it was extremely efficient, as a source of energy. It propelled our progress forward. We created mega cities, incredible technologies, and of course, polluted the planet as a result. And this has been done really with impunity until maybe 50 years ago. And we started to realize that, by burning all this stuff, we're actually changing the planet as a whole. we are basically creating an imbalance in the atmosphere so that all this heat that comes in from the sun, which happens all the time, instead of escaping back into space, is staying concentrated close to us. It's sort of like if you are cold, you put a blanket on. If you put 6 blankets on, you start getting really hot because the heat does not go out beyond you. And that's essentially what these polluting gases are doing, CO2 and methane and stuff like that. And that was the price that we have paid in order to construct this incredible civilization. However, the path that we're going forward now is not sustainable, right? We can't just keep doing this because we're 8 billion people. There's a number that I always like to tell people about, which is this. 100 years ago, during the last pandemic, roughly, the Spanish flu, there were 2 billion people on planet Earth. Now there are 8. So in 100 years, we quadrupled the population of the planet. That's like explosive. All people need to eat, they need energy, they need transportation, they need education, safety, and that costs a lot of resources, So the point is, the planet, even though it's so generous to us, it's also finite and it's being stressed. And we just can't continue this way. So that is what I call the objectification of nature, of the planet. Like we transform the planet instead of that sacred realm of our ancestors. It is not just an object, it's a thing that we can use and abuse in order to give us the comfort that we crave, right? So that's one story. The other story is the Copernican story. So now to astronomy, right? So what happened? So up to 1543, which is when Copernicus died, he also published a book on that same year, which was the book where, you learn in school, he proposes that the sun and not the earth is the center of the universe, right? So in those days, people thought that the earth was the center of everything. After all, you look up and you see everything rotating around us. You see the sun rising on the east, setting on the west, and the moon too. And you say, hey, if everything is rotating around us, we must be the center. Fair enough, right? So he says, well, actually, that's the wrong perspective. We are just a planet rotating around the sun, just like Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And what happened there was very, very profound, because once you say that the Earth is just another planet, it loses its centrality. It loses its main value as a place that we belong to, because religion was very powerful at the time that says we are the people made in the image of God. We are at the center of creation. So we are really important and we control the land, right? And Copernicus says, sorry, folks, we're just a planet. And then people say, but if we're just a planet, there are other planets out there. Look at all the stars in the sky. So if the sun is a star and it has planets around it, other stars are going to have planets too. And then you say, are there people there? And these are like the confusions, the complications that were happening 300 years ago. They would say, hey, if there are people there, are they like us? Are they humans? And if they are like humans, are they sinners? And if they're sinners, do they need a savior like Jesus? And is it the same Jesus or is it a different Jesus? So complicated stuff going on. People get very spiritually confused. And what happened in parallel with the advancement of industrialization, as the Earth becomes more and more objectified, as I mentioned before, losing its value as an important place. So the Copernican revolution, which correctly placed us as a planet going around the sun, had perhaps not an intended effect of saying that we are not important. And then you fast forward to 20th and 21st century science. And the story goes like this. The more we learn about the universe, the less important we become. So, and we here, I mean the planet Earth and us people. And then you go, how is that? Well, because first they thought that the sun was the center of everything. Now we know it's just a star. Like just on our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are about 200 billion stars, okay? So the sun is just one of them. And And then they said, okay, at least our galaxy is the center. And then in the early 20th century, people said, nope, sorry, folks. There are hundreds of billions of other galaxies out there. Milky Way is just one of them. And furthermore, these galaxies are moving away from one another. The universe is expanding. And furthermore, we discovered recently that even the stuff we're made of, the atoms, carbon, oxygen, iron that we are made of and everything is made of, is not even what controls or dominates the universe. The stuff we are made of is only about 5% of what is out there. The 95% beyond that is stuff we don't even know what it is yet. We call it dark matter and dark energy. So we say, wow, we really are insignificant in the big scheme of things. So that's kind of we have this fancy word, zeitgeist, so the mindset of how science positioned the planet and humans even in the universe. And that to me is disastrous. So what I tried to do with the book is turn this whole story upside down and say, wait a second, folks, where is all this coming from? So in the book, I tell the whole story of how the notion of many worlds came to be, many worlds meaning other planets, even other universes, but we're not going to go there, just other planets. And the notion that the fact that the Earth is a planet doesn't mean that the Earth is an ordinary planet. So what I try to show is using what we have learned now from the James Webb Space Telescope and a bunch of other observations, that actually the more we learn about, wow, look at all those stars, look at all those worlds out there. There are trillions of them. A trillion is a 1 with 12 zeros. And yet, the more we look at these worlds, the more amazing our planet is. The more magical, the more spectacular as a host for life. And that's where my book focuses on what I call biocentrism, the importance of life in the universe.
I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. We're all searching for something better in life, right? Better habits, better mindset, better relationships. But when it comes to hiring, searching isn't always the best approach. Instead of searching, why not match? That's where Indeed comes in. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's your go-to matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. Their matching engine helps you find quality candidates fast. And I mean really fast. Did you know that in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed worldwide? That's what I love about Indeed. It's like having a mindful hiring assistant. Instead of getting overwhelmed by endless resumes, you can schedule, screen, and message candidates all in one place. The platform actually learns your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets at finding people who align with your vision. And get this, 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. That's why more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast. I just love that it keeps all of my hiring processes organized. I can do everything right there instead of having spreadsheets and notes and video call links. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. You mentioned dark energy and dark matter and how there's a lot of limitations of our current instruments when it comes to studying those things. And I've heard different things like kind of how we can only hear a certain spectrum of sounds, whereas a dog can hear sounds that aren't even discernible to our ears. We only see such a small fraction of light versus what's actually out there. So you talk about how Earth is really rare in its ability to sustain life, but I'm curious, is it at all possible that some of these planets that we look at that we're like, oh, definitely no life there, that it could just be in some different frequency of light or sound that aren't yet discernible to us?
Yeah, that's a nice question. So it turns out that it's true that we humans, when we look at the world, we only see a tiny little bit of what the light that exists out there. All this other stuff, like, for example, if I had infrared goggles now, I would see Melissa glowing in the infrared, but I don't because I don't see in the infrared. We don't. Ultraviolet, same thing. And there are a bunch of microwaves, which is the stuff we use for cell phones and things like that. All these waves are like light, but not the light that our eyes evolved to see, because we live close to a star that glows mostly, in the what we call the colors of the rainbow, even though it does have infrared and it does have ultraviolet. So we are star children, So we are really the progeny of our star. And so we are adapted to see what our star mostly gives us. But you're right, there's a whole invisible realm out there of things that we cannot see, but we can see with our instruments. So you can see infrared, you can see ultraviolet. In fact, you can see in all different kinds of wavelengths that light exists, like from gamma rays, which are really powerful, explosive things that happen when a star, blows up and when there is a nuclear reaction, all the way to the very, very long radio waves, which have nothing to do with the sounds that come from radio. They're just waves. They're very long wavelength. We can see with our eyes, but we can see it with radio telescopes. So, and the sounds, same thing. So we can, I call these instruments reality amplifiers, because what they tell us is that the reality that we humans can see with our five senses, I can see you, I can hear you, I can feel the chair. That is a tiny fraction of what's really out there. We are surrounded by this invisible reality that we cannot perceive, but our instruments can. So they allow us to see things. For example, if there were life existing in different kinds of wavelengths, or we would be able to see that, in particular because most of our instruments are not really, for example, the James Webb Space Telescope is an infrared telescope. It sees light in the infrared mostly. And so, but to use your question, which is a really interesting question, are there other kinds of life there? There are life as we don't know it, right? Because when we talk about life, you say, carbon-based, water-based, like we are, like everything around this planet. Maybe there are weird kinds of life out there that do things that we can't even conceive of. And that's possible, but there are things that life does that will be universal. For example, for matter to be alive, it needs to eat. It needs to absorb energy of somehow. And it needs to expel the stuff that it doesn't need. So life, in order to exist, needs to have a relationship with the environment where it is. And because of that, it will leave its mark, so to speak. So if an alien is looking at Earth with its own telescope, it will see, oh, look at that planet. It's blue. And then what does it have in the atmosphere? Oh, it has methane. It has carbon dioxide, CO2, it has water, it has a bunch of stuff there that indicates that there is biological activity in that planet. So, and if there's a different kind of life that has a different kind of biological activity, it will have a different signature in its atmosphere, but it will still do something that is not going to be a planet that is dead. So a living planet is this wonderful thing, which is like Earth, where it's biosphere, right? Where the whole life is. And life is amazing. If you think about it, everywhere you go, there is a little bit of life, underground, surface, water, air, top of the mountains, underneath the tundra. So there is life pretty much everywhere. It always takes advantage of it and it leaves its mark. And so we should be able, with a little bit of imagination, try to find life as we don't know it in other worlds just because of the way it's interacting with its environment.
I grew up religious and I no longer identify with that. But I found that a lot of my growth has been, to put it visually, it's like breaking the cages of this little box that I was raised in, that like it can only be this way. And even just in exploring science at first, I was like, well, this goes against everything I was taught while my brain was forming. And so that had to expand it on one level. And then now I'm in this position where I've interviewed dozens of spiritual channelers. And it's like, well, how is that even possible? At first, I was like, oh, they're probably faking it. Then you witness it. And people like Paul Selig, who has literally written books by speaking it in front of a live audience with zero editing. All of his books, there's like 8 of them like that. It's just mind blowing. And when you read these, it's just like, oh, this is just truth. And so in my mind, there is definitely more out there beyond just extraterrestrials, beyond what we can see with the eyes. And I've come to the conclusion, or at least this is where I'm sitting now. Now I live in this space where I'm always allowing my mind, like, this is where I'm at now, but there's room to budge. Give me more information and I'll expand this. But good. I see things as like this total interconnectedness. A book by Greg Braden, The Divine Matrix, was really helpful. And like now, rather than empty space, I'm just assuming it's this intelligent divine grid that's in me, outside of me, everything's connected. And it really does help with that idea of just knowing I'm a part of nature, knowing I'm the environment that I'm observing, not just this ego inside of a skin suit. And so that being said, when we think about these ideas of like plural universes or other worlds, sometimes I wonder, I used to think of it as like, okay, here's planet Earth. Now there's another planet way over there and maybe way over there. And everything was like next to each other. And now I wonder, could it be that there's just different dimensions right here where we are? Maybe that's what happens when somebody passes and that's why they're getting communication from grandma. Is that they're just right here and not discernible to the eye? Or what are your beliefs in that?
So, yeah, so that's a good question. And of course, most scientists would say, nah, there's nothing. What are you talking about? We're just animated dust that, that we live for a while and there's this mystery of existence and then we go away and we become dust again, right? There's nothing else. I don't embrace that view completely, even though I'm a person that has had experience with death from very early on in my life. I lost my mom when I was 6 and in very tragic ways. And of course, once you deal with that kind of loss when you're a little child, you create a narrative of the possible other, right? In a sense of what's out there that I don't know of. And I spent years of my adolescence, trying to in some way establish contact with my mom. So everything you're talking about, spiritism, I grew up in Brazil, and Brazil is a country, perhaps is the country where spiritism is most pronounced in the whole world. Spiritism is this, it's by Allan Kardec, basically the idea that there is a world of the spirits and that you can converse with them if you can channel them, etc. And so I grew up surrounded by that. And then there were also all the African Brazilian religions that also had the idea of possession. And in Haiti, voodoo. In Brazil is not. but it's something related to that. And so I'm not a stranger to other kinds of belief. And so as a scientist, instead of adopting the this is all nonsense kind of attitude, I am not that kind of guy. I'm what you would call an agnostic. An agnostic being a person that, look, I have not seen any truly compelling evidence to believe in any of that. However, I realize that I don't know everything. I have not experienced everything. My knowledge of the mystery that surrounds us, and I have been, if anything, I've been very vocal about the fact that we are surrounded by mystery, and that, in a sense, science itself is a flirt with the unknown. If you start to think about it, what do scientists do? Well, they try to figure out things we don't know, right? So that's the whole point of like, the world is a mystery. We don't know why we exist. We don't know how 3.5 billion years ago, a little chunk of matter, like organic molecules, became a living thing, because that transition is incredible. Because one thing is to grab a piece of rock. The rock, you drop it and you leave it, say, on the top of your table, it's just going to stay there. It doesn't have what I call intentionality. But living stuff, living matter, has a purpose, right? It wants to stay alive. And where does that come from? How do you convert chemistry into urge, right? Into desire, into kind of this, I want to stay alive and I want to perpetuate my genetic lineage. I want to replicate. We have no idea. We don't even know how to define life. Okay. So we sort of have like some operational definition. Oh, life does this or life does that, but we don't know what life is. So I'm completely open to the possibility there are many, many mysteries out there that we don't understand. Funnily enough, you talked about other dimensions. My PhD thesis was on physics with more than 3 dimensions of space. It was physics with 10 dimensions or 9 dimensions. And so I've been thinking a lot about this most of my life, even though those dimensions, because we can't probe them using our experiments, they are very, very small, tiny, subatomic size, if they exist. Nowadays I have my doubts. But what is the biggest question and the biggest mystery that exists in the universe is the human brain, as far as we know. We don't know much about the human brain. You don't know why a bunch of neurons makes us who we are, right? I mean, you will wake up tomorrow and barring some horrible accidents, you're going to be Melissa, and you're going to be Melissa, and I'm going to be Marcelo, and I know that. And yet, if you look at our brains, they're not that different. But there is something that goes on. Your accumulated experiences as you live, the neurochemistry of what's, and your environment, all of that kind of conspired to create a you that is only you, with matter in your head. And how does that happen? How that subjective sense of self, like that you are who you are and that you exist. How does that work exactly? And these are questions that science is beginning to kind of probe, but in a very, very small steps, very, very tiny steps. So I can tell you many stories of my life, actually 2 or 3 of them, where something profoundly mysterious happened to me that I have applied all my methodological tools from science to try to figure out, and I can't, right? They defy any kind of rational explanation. So you go and you say, it's a coincidence, And I wrote a book called The Simple Beauty of the Unexpected, which is precisely based on, what do you mean coincidence, right? I mean, and there's this beauty of things that happen unexpectedly in your life that can completely change the course of your life, that you cannot predict they will happen, and yet they're profoundly important to you. They will impact and transform the way you're going to evolve as a human being, and you couldn't even know it was happening until it happened. So this is what I mean by the unexpected beauty, And so I still don't know how to answer those strange things that I actually tell a story in this book, The Simple Beauty of the Unexpected. It's called The Witch of Copacabana, right? Copacabana is where I grew up in Rio, in Brazil. It's this beautiful beach, etc. And I had, we all had in those days, middle class people had maids, cooks and stuff like that. And this lady was a priestess in the African Brazilian ritual called candomblé. So she was a channeler of spirits. And my father once gave a dinner party, and I never actually told this story in public. He gave a dinner party, and it was a really fancy party. He invited all these big guests, and he gave this to the minister, or basically the Chief Justice of Portugal that came. He gave a little whiskey, and the guy takes a sip and says, "I'm sorry, Isaac, but this is not whiskey, this is tea." And my father is like mortified. "What do you mean it's tea?" And so what happened is that this lady, her name was Maria, drank everything that my father had. They had amber color, like whiskey, rum, cognac. She was always kind of drunk, cooking like that, waving around, and put tea in there because, they were permanently kind of out in an altered state. She was an alcoholic and a channeler in a sense. And my father was furious and he fired her. But that night, he said, "Tomorrow you leave." And then, she says, "I'll leave, but something will happen to this house." And then she grabbed me by I was 17 at the time. She grabbed me by my shoulders. She shook me and she said, "But you, Marcelo, you're going to be okay because you have what I call closed body, corpo fechado, meaning the spirits protect you." I'm like, "Phew, good." Anyway, so a month passes, nothing happens. I'm studying for my university entry exams, and I had this weird, strange feeling that I had to go to the living room where we had our dining room table. There were two closets, one on each edge of the dining room table, filled with crystal shelves and glasses and bottles. And I look at the top shelf, and the top shelf collapses, and all these crystal shelves, the crystal shelves collapse with the glasses, with the bottles. And then literally a second or two later, the one on the opposite side of the room also collapses, both of them at the same time. So all this crystal is destroyed in seconds. And you ask yourself, how the heck could this happen? I mean, one thing is one shelf breaking, and then, because it's old, it's bent by weight, but both of them at the same time, it was mind-boggling. And it was about drinking, all the crystal, glasses and stuff like that. So I called my father, and he was a dentist, and I said, "Dad, everything broke down here." He said, "She did it. She did it." So basically meaning her prophecy came true. Now, I tried to figure out all possible explanations for this story. Oh, maybe there was a sonic boom from an airplane. Maybe there was an earthquake. There are no supersonic airplanes in the Brazilian Air Force, no earthquakes. There was really nothing that could explain the two of them breaking down together. So there you go. It's a mystery. Why it happened, how it happened, I don't know, but it happened. And I was there, big time.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just one scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level, and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com.
Bored at home? Head over to Chumba Casino and join some serious social casino fun. With hundreds of games at your fingertips, no purchase necessary. You can play anytime, anywhere. There's a special welcome bonus waiting for you when you sign up. Play for fun, play for free, and you could even redeem some great prizes. Visit ChumbaCasino.com and get ready to reel in the fun. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
When my dad was dying of cancer, and I got a phone call in the middle of the night, and I answered it. And my dad was just like, "I just need you to know that I'm okay." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I had answered this red corded phone on my nightstand. Well, the weird thing is I didn't have a red corded phone on my nightstand, so it kind of triggered to me that it was a dream. And then I woke up to my mom calling me and telling me that my dad had died. And so that was one of those moments for me where I was in this, like, I was 19 and I was in this period of my life where at about age 15, I really started pushing back against religion. And then I had gotten to this point where I was just like, there's no God. We just die. We die. That's all that happens. And so that really got me shifting my thinking that there was something outside of that. And so I kind of lived in a limbo for a while until I started studying like broader spirituality. I'm still on that path of exploration, really figuring out what it is I believe. I'm sure I'll be on that forever. But part of me that thinks, especially over the last few years, I've grown to have a pretty severe distrust in most mainstream things. It started with health when my dad died. Just the medical experience that we had really got me distrustful of all that. I was overprescribed Adderall for so many years. Long story short, now I'm one of the most holistically minded people that I know. I do love Western medicine, but for emergencies, not just like, oh, I'm not feeling that great. It's like, if I break my arm, yes, I'm going to the hospital, things like that. Yeah. But otherwise I go towards the sort of natural methods as much as possible. And it's partially with what you say. The more I can live in relation to nature, I feel like the better versus dominating nature. And so, but the more I learn, it's like I recently watched this documentary on Hulu called Dope Sick. It's all about the opioid epidemic. Watching that is mind blowing. I thought I knew it all until you really watch everything that happened. And it's like, seems like you almost have to be evil to get to the top, to amass the amounts of wealth that some people at the top have, which brings the question, all right, so how many of the people at the very top of our ecosystem are selfish and not about the people they're serving, but about their own profit margins? And all of us just become numbers. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it makes me wonder how many of the things that we believe in history have been just sort of adapted to where we get this idea of chance, this idea of insignificance, this idea of meaninglessness, because it benefits their bottom line. Because the other alternative would be that we're kind of a self-destructing race, whereas the wolves are out there kind of knowing how to nurture their environments and keep it sustainable. And we're just like, oh, money, let's slowly kill ourselves. Is it us as a species, or is it that by nature of how this all works, just the people at the top that are then creating the educational systems and creating the food systems and creating all of these systems are convincing us of one thing to where we are kind of leading to our own self-destruction?
Yeah, that's, I think, yes, there is a component of evil and power, because power corrupts and it seduces, and the more you have, the more you want. And these people lost the capacity of empathy, of caring for other human beings, but they're not the only humans in the planet. And I think that, and I am an eternal optimist because, to me, a pessimist is a person that gets into the soccer field and doesn't even kick the ball before when the game starts because you already lost the game. And what kind of life is that, right? You don't want to live that way. So you have to believe that it is possible to change. And the best place for that to happen, if you believe in it, is not to wait for it to happen, but to change yourself and to start acting in a way that is conducive to being in the world that you want to be in. And unfortunately, a lot of people have this cognitive dissonance when it comes to that, and does not connect. People just don't connect the dots as well as they could. So, for example, you go to a farm, and you see, oh, look at the little calf and the cow, and it's so cute, and you want to touch the calf and the cow. But then you go to the supermarket and you buy a pound of ground beef, like not connecting the story that started with the cow and ended with the ground beef in the supermarket, and sort of not even thinking that there is a connection there. That's what cognitive dissonance is, because to realize the connection is painful. And so you sort of choose not to look that way. But I think that more and more, I am just like you. I'm vegan. I'm very nature oriented. I run trails. I try to keep in shape by being out in nature all the time. Same with my whole family. My kids, they're all like that. We eat that way and we try to behave that way. And what I tell people is that more and more people will start to act that way if they understand that their actions make a difference. What happens is that you say, oh, I'm too small. The billionaires control the planet. There's nothing that I can do. And so I'm not doing anything. Well, that's the problem, because if more people that feel upset about the situation started to actually change the way they eat, change the way they use water, change the way they use energy, transportation, change the way they relate to other humans, to other people that even disagree with them, but have this openness and humility to kind of relate to them in an equal basis, because we all have a story, we all come from somewhere. And there is one universal thing about humans, that we all want to be loved, hence the title of your podcast, Mind Love, and we all want to love as well. And so if you use that starting point and you realize that, as you mentioned, everything is connected. There's this Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh, right, that talks about interbeing. I think interbeing is a beautiful idea. And in my book, I explain why interbeing is the right way to think about us, because we are deeply connected through what we are made of, to the planet, to the stars, to the whole history of the universe. So the stuff we are made of, the iron, the calcium, all of that came from dying stars billions of years ago. Just pause for a second and think about this, right? So you say, oh, I'm 40, or I'm 30, or I'm 50. Yeah, but that's this conglomeration of stuff right now, because the stuff you're made of is billions of years old, and it traces you back to the stars. And the fact that we know this, we as humans know this, and that we can tell stories about who we are and where we come from and why life is connected, does make a difference. And it makes a difference in bringing back our understanding that we matter, that we are not insignificant, that our planet is not insignificant, that we actually have a mission, protect life, to reintegrate ourselves with the living planet, so that we can stay here for longer, and as can all the other animals, because this separation that we created, the cities, the buildings, and nature outside, concrete inside, is really artificial if you think about it. And it's okay as long as that's not the only thing you look at, So if you take the time to reflect about the way you behave in the world and say, I'm not happy with the way the world is, okay, then change, do something that you'll be proud of, that will make a difference for you, for the people around you. And that to me is going to be a snowball effect. And things are beginning to change. For example, now we have this thing called B Corps, the B corporations, which is the big companies that have an ethical way of relating to the environment, to the producers. So if you're getting chia seeds from Central America or South America, how do the workers there are treated? So there is a way of doing business that does give you the bottom line, which does not need to be evil. And the more people understand that, the better it's going to be, because people say, wait, you know what? I don't like that company because they're mean, but I like this company because they're good. So I'm not going to buy from that company anymore. I'm going to buy from this company. And once people start to do that, capitalism is going to realign itself. And even the evil companies are going to go, look, either we change or we die. And that's the revolution that I want to see happening, and that I hope, slowly is going to happen.
That's such a good point, because so many people do just throw their hands up in the air, and it goes back to the original point of feeling insignificant, like we can't really change things. One of the ways that I combat this in my mind, I'm always just kind of thinking of different ways to think about existence. And it's like, it doesn't even really matter which one is right, which one is going to help me be my best self. And one of the ones that I play with is kind of talked about this idea of infinite dimensions. Well, when I was learning about the law of attraction like a decade ago, I'm like, how would this even be possible? And one of the things I just thought about was, well, what if I'm just always tuning into the exact world that is a reflection of my worldview? And one of the reasons this came, I went through a really hard time in my early 20s. I was just kind of in crisis and making horrible decisions, also horrible things happening to me. And my dad died at that time. And so I was just spiraling. And one of the horrible decisions I was making, I went through this whole phase of being kind of a klepto. I'd like go to Walmart and just like steal a lip gloss. It was things I didn't even really want. There was something about the power, and I was just like, screw everything.
Yeah.
And during that time, I ended up in a relationship with somebody. It was my most traumatic relationship to date. But over time, I ended up finding out he was addicted to gambling. And then I found out he was addicted to meth. And then I ultimately found out that he was secretly robbing houses. Well, when I started processing all of this, because there was a whole spiral of that relationship, I ended up going to jail for his crimes for a short minute there. And so I really had to do a lot of soul searching to come out of that. And it just always really, it was glaringly obvious to me that during the time that I was stealing little things, I attracted this person into my life that was stealing big things. Also, my stuff got stolen all the time. Like I would leave my phone on a table at a party and it would just be stolen. And I'm like, what? And so it just was reinforcing my worldview that this is just what people did. Mm-hmm. Well, now there's been like times where I've accidentally walked out with water under a cart and I'm like, nope, going back in to pay for this. And I recently like left a wallet somewhere with $300 cash in it, and it was just turned in, not one thing missing. And so I very much believe that the way that I interact with the world is what's reflected back to me. Now, all this to say, I sometimes wonder if I'm just tuning into different dimensions at different times. And it's like, wow, there's a whole lot of evil here. Well, what am I believing about the nature of the universe at this moment? And whether that turns out to be true or just a way to kind of help me be my best self and feel more significant in this moment, I don't really think matters ultimately. But I empower myself in those moments of hopelessness through meditation, through just kind of believing like, this is how I'm going to exude. This is the energy I'm going to carry. And I'm going to trust that it has a ripple effect with every single person that I meet. And then they'll ripple outward from there. And then they'll ripple outward from there. And it just not only helps me engage with the universe in a way where I see that we're all connected, but it helps me trust that the actions that I do right now matter.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm so glad that you survive all that. In a sense, there is this beautiful saying, which research is me search. In a sense, we're always experimenting with who we are. And And through this experimentation, we actually get to know ourselves better. It's a work in progress. You're never going to finish that. Even though I'm much older than you are, I'm still experimenting and trying to find new ways of being. And that's always going to be true. And so as long as you try to understand who you are, or at least as long as you are interested in knowing and learning, then your life matters. And that is so important, because people, as you said, lose that zest for asking questions and just takes things as they are. And when you do that, you're just living less than you can, because life is this privilege. Maybe there are other lives out there. Maybe there are other dimensions where we coexist with other selves, and who knows? But right now, this is the one that we have, and this is the one that we have to make count. And the more people realize that, the more people try to find a path in life that is meaningful and that is kind, and that brings humility onto the table, meaning like, I know some things, but I don't know everything. And I'm always open to learn a little more. Then there is room for us to grow as a species.
One of the areas that has changed a lot from historical times is we used to identify with religion more, and all these religions came with these creation myths that inspired awe and humility. Now that many of us are finding different worldviews, going to the science side of it, how do you recommend that we can bring this awe and humility back into our daily lives more intentionally and mindfully?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first book was called The Dense Universe, From Creation Myths to the Big Bang. And I basically start the book telling about all these different stories of where did everything come from and why we're here, to the scientific story, which is, the Big Bang, which is the beginning of time as we know it. And you're right. I mean, we have been having this desacralization of the world, as we discussed before, as we evolved our scientific and materialistic way of thinking about existence. But people are hurting, and they seem to be needing something that goes beyond that. It's not just about how many earrings or how many Rolexes you have, but it's about, do I live a life of meaning? Do I live a life that matters? You can buy 20 Rolexes and feel completely like an empty shell, even though you have all these expensive things in your arm, and your life doesn't matter for anything. So the way I look at that now, and I also grew up, I wouldn't say I grew up religious, but I grew up in a pretty religious family. And I have, as you, changed the way I think about religion very much. But I still believe that I'm a very spiritual person. And spirituality as a notion of being does not need to be attached to any specific religious creed. It does not have to be Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist spirituality. It's just a way of being in the world. And the way of being in the world is, again, to understand, at least that's what I try to describe in The Dawn of the Mindful Universe, this book, that once you look at nature with your open heart and your open mind, and you embrace the beauty of the natural world, the privilege of being part of all of this, the interconnectedness, the fact that the air that you may say, I'm not connected. I live in a big high rise in Shanghai or in New York City. You're completely connected, because if you don't breathe good air, you die. If you don't drink good water, you die. And where is that coming from? Where is the air coming from? From the atmosphere, and the water is coming from the circulation of the water cycle, the rivers and the ocean. So even if you think you're not connected, you are connected. And if you give yourself the gift of stepping out of your life once in a while and looking at the night sky, looking at the stars, walking by a beach in sunset, going even to a city park if you are in a big city, and stopping for a moment to look at what's going on around me, which is not people, but it's bugs and birds and trees and flowers and ants, you realize that there is this whole universe happening right in front of you that we just forgot to pay attention to. But once we start to pay attention to that, you say, wow, this is all part of who I am. There is no separation here. Because, for example, if you don't have bees, we can't eat because there's no pollination. So the connections are very deep indeed, and we have to remind ourselves of that. And the best way is to go out in nature and be awed. Awe is a wonderful word. I love the word awe. I word the word luminous and the word spiritual, because all of these things kind of make us become bigger than we are and connected with powers that are much vaster than we can conceive, that we can understand. Again, the fact that we're always kind of spreading our tentacles into this mystery of who we are, right? And we can't ever get to a final answer. That to me is a big inspiration to live another day. Because every other day, every next day, you go, okay, I'm a little closer to that, and I'm a little closer to that. And to me, that's just what life is all about.
Well, I love leaving listeners with something actionable or something to think about for the week to kind of ground all of this into their lives. Some intentional mind love, if you will. So if you're going to leave listeners with one thing to focus on this week, whether it's a thought, an action, what would that be?
Do yourself a favor, especially if you live in a city, and give yourself a half an hour where you just leave everything behind on a weekend and go walk in a park. And not just look at the biker or the roller skater, but look at all the natural world that is in that park. And if you have the privilege of being close to a trail, take a good walk, a hike on a trail, and immerse yourself in this world, because we have lived for almost all of our existence as a species totally connected and integrated with nature. And having forgotten that has been hurting us for the last 10,000 years. And it's time that we reawaken this connectivity with the natural world. It's going to be good for your soul, it's going to be good for your mind, and it's going to be good for your body too, because there are all sorts of studies now that talk about how being in nature decreases your hormone, your stress hormones, decreases your heartbeat. And it's just good for you, because that's where we came from. We just forgot.
Well, thank you so much for all the research that you put into this book, A Dawn of a Mindful Universe. It was so interesting. And for anybody out there that loves learning about the natural world, about history, in a way that we can actually see how it's affected the way we interact with our universe. It's just a really great read. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your books, where's the best place for them to connect?
Well, if you just look at my name, Marcelo Gleiser, I'm everywhere, really. It's very easy. I have marcelogleiser.com, and then Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and my books, of course. And if you get bogged down with the science, sometimes in the book, just skip the page. I won't tell. And move on to the philosophy and what it really means to be a human, which is what this book is all about.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/136. Your challenge for this week is to go take a walk without technology. Ironically, as I'm recording this, I am in a Wi-Fi outage. And while that might sound not as intense as having no technology, I also don't get any cell reception in my house. So it feels like I have no technology, despite recording on some very high-tech equipment right now. But I was noticing how funny it is that going to the bathroom, realizing you forgot your phone, feels like a crisis. But when you just have to accept it, let go, realize this is how it is. Seriously, all around my town, Verizon is out, as is Wi-Fi. So I even went to the post office, no scrolling while waiting in line. I just had to sit there and smile at people. And man, does it feel good. I go in and out of my technology addictions. I'm not going to pretend that that's an area of my life that I have all under control. I have it under control enough to be productive and get everything I need done. However, it's really hard to be breastfeeding as often as I am without scrolling, doom scrolling, shopping scrolling, whatever it is. But sometime a couple years ago, I interviewed somebody on disconnecting from technology, and I got my phone usage down below 26 minutes per day for weeks. And I swear, I don't think I've ever been happier. So it's something that I am constantly working on, something that we need to remind ourselves about. But especially if you go and actually explore nature, like we did in ancient times, the 90s. I came across a video recently of a 90s outdoor party and no one was looking down at phones because they didn't have any. And oh my goodness, the good old days. It feels impossible to get back. But we can get it back within ourselves, just one person at a time. Yes, the downside might be that you're actually looking up, smiling at people and no one's smiling back. But I think it's worth it for our own peace of mind, for our own brains to discover boredom again so we can think creatively instead of constantly reaching outside of ourselves to ask ChatGPT or Google. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram, but not during the challenge because you're not supposed to have your phone. I'm on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. You can find all of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.